Good morning.
We're going to learn and practice a little Swahili first thing. So this will be part of your fun pre-show entertainment. So if you want to just kind of repeat after me and practice some of the words. Siyahambe. And we're going to connect these. Eku kanyen. Cuencos. So, Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Pretty darn good. Daniel, can you play that first phrase for us? So that's going to sound like this. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Good. Now let's all try it together. 1, 2, 3. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Not too bad. And Daniel, will you play the next phrase for us? Good. And luckily, it's all the same words. So 1, 2, 3. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. And Daniel, will you play the next one? And then singing it together. 1, 2, 3. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. And then the last phrase. And together. 1, 2, 3. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Good. Let's sing all of the Swahili together, all at once. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. You guys are amazing. And then the next part. So same words again. It's really easy. So we just go, and so instead of Siyahambe, we have Siyahamba in this little part. So it's a little bit different. So Siyahamba, Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. Siyahamba, Siyahambe kukanyen cuencos. And you learned the song. You guys are great.
Morning. I guess I'm ready to move. Are you? Okay. I'm Carolyn, part of this congregation, and I invite everybody on social media to check in with us and join us. Just a reminder about the cell phones. Everybody got theirs turned off, I hope. Remind us of where the exits are. There's one up here and one there, and of course 2 back there. Welcome, all you live stream guests. If anybody's brought a guest, would you like to stand and introduce them? If you have brought yourself and you would like to let us know who you are, this is a great time to do that. Do we have somebody? Yes. Hi. I'm sorry, tell me again. Leona from Seattle? Aha, welcome. Welcome, Daniel. Yeah, I'm glad we had some good weather for you. Is there anyone else? We have a Sunday Plus lunch today, and you are most welcome to come. Do not pay. You are our guest. Yeah, the menu looks really, really good. We're missing Anthony because he's under the weather. Oh, so keep him in your thoughts. we welcome Daniel Doss. Yay! Thank you, Daniel. So, I think that's all I need to do. I'm glad you're here, and have a good Sunday. What am I doing?
And we would also like to welcome our guest, percussionist Tom Barter.
Oh, stop
Good morning and welcome once again to this place of covenant community, to this hour of reflection and renewal. Once again, we come together in the shadow of burning churches, gathered this morning in spirit with 3 historically Black congregations in St. Landry Parish, Louisiana: Greater Union Baptist Church and Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Opelousas, and St. Mary Baptist Church in Port Barre, all suffering devastating fires of suspicious origins in the past 10 days. We know that to burn a building is not to destroy a community or a faith, but it is a message of willful hate, showing how far our nation falls short of the promises of equal liberty and justice for all its citizens. They are correct in their analysis, these arsonists, for it is in such small communities of faithful witness and mutual care that the Spirit abides and the arc of history begins its bend toward justice. In just such congregations, the seeds are nourished that will someday bring down the culture of supremacy and domination. For what is that culture but the idolatry of power? And what is the authentic church anywhere, in any form, but a calling out against that idolatry, a reclaiming of our minds and hearts for what is finally worthy of our reverence, for love and justice and peace, for truth and reason and compassion, for resistance against oppression, and building the beloved community and gathering at the welcome table. They will do all that this morning among the ashes in Opelousas and Port Bar, and they will know exactly what their church means and how much their faith matters by the forces that have tried to intimidate and silence them. May we, here in our beloved building, with our heritage intact, yet be summoned to an awareness like that of St. Mary's and Mount Pleasant and Greater Union, that it is the bonds of love that create the temple of the Spirit, not walls and rafters and doors. As we kindle this chalice flame, may it call to our minds the destructive impact of evil and hatred, the urgency of our task to upbuild communities of resistance and liberation, and the enduring witness of our love and service in the name of the highest good we know.
Hello,
Hello.
my name is Rose, and I light this chalice for the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Thank you. Now let's rise in body and spirit and speak once again the words of our covenant promise to one another. Together we affirm goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now remember that song we just learned? Okay. Now, Anthony, who is our guide as we support the AIDS Foundation Network, is not here this morning, but two of his good friends are to introduce us to our offering for this month.
Thank you, Reverend Gibbons. Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Michael Lenticum. I'm the event director for AIDS Walk Kansas City and for the AIDS Service Foundation of Greater Kansas City, which this church has been supporting for much longer than I've been around. And this is going to be my 25th AIDS Walk this year. So I didn't do that for applause. That's just saying how long you all have really been great to our organization. Just a few things. It says Angela and Danielle were going to be here this morning as well. But whatever Anthony has, I think the women do too. And they are two of our co-chairs, but they might be back the next few weeks. This is our 31st year of AIDS Walk here in Kansas City. And because of support like yours and our corporate support and our volunteers and friends, Kansas City has one of the longest AIDS Walk in the history of the country. Big cities are still going strong, like New York and San Francisco and Atlanta, but the smaller towns and like our marketplaces, if they do have an AIDS Walk, it has not nearly the touch and the feel and the reach, nor does it raise as much money. We're on our way, and with your help, we'll get there this year, raising $500,000 by June 30th. Our walk will actually be April the 27th. That's a Saturday morning. 8 o'clock is registration. 9 o'clock is welcoming ceremonies. 10 o'clock, we hit the streets to remind everybody that this is still an important cause in not only our community, but the world. And here in our community, there are 5,700 people living with HIV/AIDS every day. Out of that, 700 are young people between the ages of 13 and 24. So it affects all of us, young and old, moms and dads. So it's important that young people know that they too are at risk and to educate themselves on how they can prevent this disease. This year, our theme with AIDS Walk is U equals U. If you've seen some of our logos this year, you might ask yourself, what does U equals U mean? It means undetectable equals untransmittable. And my friend Chuck Comstock from our steering committee is here to tell you a little bit more in a personal story.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Happy to be here. As Michael said, I'm Chuck Comstock. I'm a native Kansas Citian, and never in my wildest dreams, 32 years ago when I was diagnosed HIV positive, would I ever have believed that I'd still be here and that we would have the possibility of ending HIV and AIDS. But the way that happens is with our campaign, U equals U. Undetectable equals untransmittable. But that takes funds. And that's what AIDS Walk is about, is raising the money so that individuals can get tested and know their status. And that's done through our KC Health Clinic, health care. And then if they are positive, that they receive counseling, and they receive medical attention, and they receive medication, because it requires a lot of money. Every month, over $2,000 in cash price for medications for HIV. That's not easily done. And that's why it's so important that every dollar that comes through AIDS Walk stays in Kansas City. It goes to the 4 agencies that are working every day with men, women, and children. And that we get to that state where U equals U and HIV is no more. Thank you for everything that you're doing and will do.
Thank you again.
In this awareness, our offering for this morning will now be given and gratefully received.
All was quiet and calm, just the rocks and the sun. There came a beat that was steady and strong. Soon the music was born and the dance was begun. That's what music sings to you. That's what music sings to you. Bring the song is up to you. Join in the dance. Dancing like a weaver. Dancing like a weaver. Dance and sing. Dancing like a weaver.
Now will you join me in the word of dedication for our offering? Together, we dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society. This Tuesday, 2 of our members will depart on a visit to our partner church in Nerad Galfalva, a village that was once part of the Kingdom of Transylvania. Ken and Ann, come on up. The people of this village have been Unitarians for hundreds of years, following the 16th century affirmation, Idyas Ashten, God is one. Their young minister, Bela Jakubowski, has been a student at our UU seminaries here in the U.S. and speaks excellent English. He has been leading the congregation in restoring the church building, the community hall, and the minister's residence, which also serves as meeting space for church groups. Many of these improvements have been accomplished with help from our congregation. I'm delighted that Ken and Ann will be able to see firsthand how things are going and celebrate Easter with their community. It is customary to send a gift for use or display in the church, as well as practical financial assistance. This pulpit hanging is a gift from the Galfalva congregation to us. And so, Ken, I would ask you to present this stole to Bela as another link in the web of our connections. Please travel safely and take our warm greetings to our friends.
This is the book we're going to give out. Dick Dawson did these pictures.
Okay, so we're also taking this album of pictures that was put together by Dick Dawson. This is one of our longtime partner church people. So we'll look forward to hearing from you when you get back and go with our blessings. Yeah. And now it's time for the children to leave us, so we will sing them out. The Unitarian poet-philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson once observed, "We have a great deal more kindness than is ever spoken. The whole human family is bathed with an element of love like a fine ether. How many persons we meet in houses whom we scarcely have a chance to speak to, whom yet we honor, and who honor us. How many we see in the street or sit with in church, whom, though silently, we rejoice to be with. Read the language of these wandering glances. The heart knoweth." Let us lift our hearts together into the community of shared silence.
From Background on the Eighth Principle from Black Lives of UU. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions.
Beloved community happens when people of diverse racial, ethnic, educational, class, gender, sexual orientation, backgrounds, and identities come together in an interdependent relationship of love, mutual respect, and care that seeks to realize justice within the community and in the broader world.
Most UU congregations are primarily European American in membership, culture, especially music, and leadership, even when located near diverse communities. A person can believe they are being a good UU and following the 7 principles without thinking about or dealing with racism and other oppressions at the systemic level. For people identified as white, it's too easy to ignore these issues, which is exactly what keeps the system of racism in our society alive and in fact worsening right now. We need to decenter whiteness and other dominant cultures in UUism.
The UU principles were designed to be dynamic, not a fixed creed. This means we want to always continue to be educating ourselves, exploring truth, and raising our consciousness. When we get to a new level of understanding and clarity, our structure makes it possible to reflect that. UU is the only religion that intentionally builds in that flexibility to acknowledge the importance of ongoing revealed truth. This happened when environmental awareness reached a critical mass and got added as part of the 7th principle. We are approaching a similar critical mass level of awareness with the systemic nature of racism and other oppressions.
The new Jim Crow, mass incarceration, and the criminal justice system replacing the older systems of slavery and Jim Crow laws, police violence against people of color, recent Supreme Court decisions on voting rights and affirmative action, and the election of Donald Trump with advisors and followers, including former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, openly supporting white supremacists, show that the country is moving quickly and dangerously in the wrong direction. UUs need to take strong leadership to reverse these trends.
Critics have long puzzled over the final chapters of Mark Twain's classic meditation on race in America, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. The teenage Huck's flight from his abusive father and journey down the Mississippi River together with the escaping slave Jim are skillfully drawn and familiar tropes in American literature. But the end of the book descends into a sort of farce, with the reappearance of Huck's friend, Tom Sawyer, who is an admirer of high adventure tales like the Three Musketeers. When Jim is captured by the somewhat bumbling local authorities and locked into a barn for safekeeping while they attempt to communicate with his owner, Tom insists on an elaborate Rube Goldberg plot to break him out, even though it would be extremely simple for either of the boys to just release him at any time. Jim goes along with all the romantic flourishes of this process without comment, with an apparently implicit trust in Tom's determination to complete this adventure with what he calls style. In the end, it is revealed that Tom has known from the moment of his first appearance that Jim's owner recently died, bequeathing his freedom in her will. Everyone has a good laugh, and Huck meditates on lighting out for the territories as his next move. Some commentators think that Twain was simply tired of the story and eager to bring the book to publication, and so finished it with a romp that would appeal to his reader's sense of humor. Personally, I found the final section boring and juvenile, and Tom's adolescent presence irritating after the emotional development that had unfolded in Huck. But I have now begun to wonder if these chapters are not actually Twain's most subtle and brilliant critique of racism as a social force beyond the brute reality of slavery. Through the course of their adventure down the river, Jim and Huck have encountered challenges and dangers and have arrived at a personal relationship of mutuality, respect, and care. Huck's ideas about slaves and people of color have also changed from this experience. When Tom appears, having undergone no such transformation, the contrast is startling. So is the insouciance of his insistence on playing out his adolescent fantasies of heroism without regard to the reality of Jim's situation or Jim's preferences in the matter. Jim's slavery is at that point a fiction, and Tom knows it, but he chooses to gratify his own pleasure in the play acting rather than respect Jim's autonomy and dignity. The black character's life, safety, and freedom serve as a stage for the realization of the white character's impulses, a contrast made all the more stark by the fact that Jim is an adult and a father, while Tom and Huck are still boys, and yet the power of law and society is all in their hands. Jim is expected to be grateful for their help on whatever terms they choose to offer it. Twain centers the experience of the white characters and does not attempt to enter into Jim's consciousness. To most white readers, this choice is invisible and inevitable. But if I am correct in what I now suspect, it is Twain's demonstration that Jim's subjugation lies not in his formal legal status as a slave, which can and would change, but rather in the way his color makes him an object to reflect the dominant culture rather than a subject with his own awareness and agenda. Tom's performance of heroism is the opposite of anything that really serves Jim's interest. Let those who have eyes see, and those who have ears understand. Which brings us to the hidden nation of Wakanda. This invented land, located somewhere imprecise on the continent of Africa, is the homeland of the comic book superhero Black Panther, also known as King T'Challa, ruler of the tribes of Wakanda. It is a country composed of both past and future, where the meteorite substance vibranium enables marvelous scientific and technical advances. At the same time, because it was never invaded or colonized by European powers, Wakanda's heritage of tradition has not suffered violent disruption, so that many old ways and customs continue to be practiced. Women lead armies and scientific research, but kingship is determined by hand-to-hand combat between rivals at the edge of a waterfall. A secret herb gives the victorious king almost superhuman perceptions and strength, while the Black Panther costume adds its special capabilities to his general imperviousness against attack. It is his hereditary task to protect Wakanda and its citizens from discovery or exploitation by world powers. The land is naturally beautiful and abundant. The urban center is vibrant, peaceful, and prosperous. It is a utopian community, unscarred by the traumas of slavery or the wars of empire. It is safe and intact after centuries, in part because the opinions of white people are irrelevant to its functioning. Comic books, with their superhero characters, have been read by establishment critics as subversive, at least since the early 1950s. The narrative adventure comic magazine, as opposed to compendia of humorous individual cartoon strips, originated in 1938 with the publication of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's Superman. It was only 16 years later that the psychiatrist Frederick Wortham published a book, Seduction of the Innocent, which expressed alarm about the imagery of violence, criminality, sexuality, political dissent, and perversion, which he claimed were illustrated and advocated in comic books. Sounds transgressive to me, if you remember our discussion from last week. Not surprisingly, teenagers were consuming these publications eagerly, and Wortham's claims inspired congressional hearings into the comic book industry. This resulted in the creation of the self-censoring Comics Code Association, among whose standards was that criminals must always be punished in the story arc. Many darker true crime and horror story comics ceased publication at that point, leaving the adventures of superheroes as the dominant form of these new graphic narratives. It was not until the social and racial upheavals of the 60s were well underway that Marvel Comics writer Jack Kirby recognized that while many of their readers were Black, none of their heroes was. The character Black Panther premiered as a one-off in 1966 and joined the regular cast of the Avengers in '68. It would not be until 1977, 11 years after his introduction, that the Panther would feature in his own episode. But by then, the backstory of Wakanda's existence was well established. One of the existential conflicts that continually drives T'Challa is whether his secret homeland has a responsibility to share its wisdom or its power with the rest of the world, or if it must remain hidden in order to preserve its uniquely peaceful, prosperous, and Black way of life. In one way, Wakanda is itself the product of white-centered consciousness, assuming that any essentially Black experience or reality must be mysterious and inaccessible to the default of white awareness. The dominant culture looks at Wakanda and sees either nothing, because the nation is successfully disguised, or else something withheld and unfathomable, a colorful combination of magic and the exotic, defined by its otherness and a power to be extracted and exploited. That is what the colonial gaze always sees. So as I try to look beyond that dominating centered perspective, I wonder, if those of us who are white can expand our collective imagination enough to recognize what Tom Sawyer's foolery about heroism looks like to Jim's deadly earnest concern for his own real freedom, can we also begin to imagine the significance of a hidden homeland of justice and power to the lives of our Black neighbors? I wonder whether the story of Wakanda does not suggest that there is something inalienable at the core of personal and collective Black identity, something that neither slavery nor colonialism in all its forms was able to destroy, something unviolated in spite of the centuries of violation and violence, a source of power, identity, memory, and continuity, and a vision for the future. The European colonialists often purported to view themselves as white saviors, bringing advancement to people they considered backwards by replicating their own home cultures in distant lands, without reference to what the people already living there thought or wanted, much as Tom played out his heroic fantasies without consulting Jim. Hannah Beachler, the production designer for the movie Black Panther, made the Records Hall the central architecture of her visuals for Wakanda's capital, the Golden City. When she was asked by an interviewer, why select such a dry-seeming building as the centerpiece, she replied, because the residents of Wakanda know everything about their past, a privilege that real-world African Americans don't have, and that will never go away again in this city. I felt that way because I never knew my history. I didn't know my ancestry. I didn't know how far back it went. That was the most important thing to me. I don't have that, but I could give it to others here in this fantastical world. This never gets old, says T'Challa, as his spaceship makes the transition from holographic African plains to the hidden metropolis of Golden City. In the end, of course, Wakanda is, in an important way, not mine. It may have begun as a proposal by white authors inventing a Black hero, but in today's world, it seems to have found new resonance in the imaginations of Black artists, athletes, and young people, as well as moviegoers. The comic book series continues, now written by Ta-Nehisi Coates, the best-selling author and journalist, celebrating the ongoingly subversive nature of that genre. I hope Wakanda flourishes, giving roots and wings to the imagination of a Black community and a Black heritage that claims a rightful place in both American and global culture. I hope that that community identifies and celebrates both the real heroes of its past and the fantasy heroes of its gladdest futures and its most dreadful fears. Now, you may or may not personally be a fan of comic books or superhero movies or science fiction fantasy. But the question confronts us as a religious tradition. Is the work of recognizing and dismantling racism and reimagining racial identity a religious task? Can you be a Unitarian Universalist with integrity while setting this particular demand aside? Our Methodist friends recently illustrated what it looks like when this question is posed concerning the full recognition and inclusion of GLBTQ members on a global basis, and it wasn't pretty. So, do we really want to stir this particular pot? Or on the other hand, do we actually have a choice? Is there some place of neutrality in between extending the status quo or consciously and deliberately resisting the effects of white supremacy? Many Unitarian Universalist leaders of color are asking us to make the rejection of such supremacy a stated principle of our faith, to affirm that spiritual wholeness is not possible for us as individuals or as a community if we are prepared to countenance racism in return for the privileges that some of us enjoy or the comfort of being left alone about this issue. These leaders of color are initiating a process of discussion about adding an eighth principle to our UUA bylaws, a principle that would commit us as a covenanted religious body to build a beloved community and to dismantle the oppressions that reside in our culture and in our individual habits of thought. It would ask all of us to be accountable for this work, to challenge the structures of our institutions as well as each other's assumptions and behavior. Even the conversation about whether this new principle would be a good idea is, I suspect, going to make us all deeply uncomfortable. Probably no one in this room consciously wants to preserve a social structure founded on racial supremacy. If we could snap our fingers and make that aspect of our inheritance disappear, we would do it. I would, for sure, even if I were persuaded that such a shift would come at a significant cost to me personally. And yet, dismantling the structures of privilege requires more than goodwill. It depends on having the imagination to see the world through eyes other than your own. It cannot happen unless we have the capacity to ask creative questions. Questions like, if there were a people of color who had never been subjected to colonialism or slavery, what kind of world would they build? Would it be perfect? Unlikely, I think. Would it be different? It would have to be, surely. What kind of heroes would they inspire? What kind of leaders would they follow? What kind of threats would they fear the most? One of the insidious ways in which privilege operates is to make it unnecessary to see any perspective but our own. Those of us who have inherited the privileges of whiteness do not have to ask ourselves or each other these kinds of questions. Nothing in our situation makes us do so. And it is even perhaps disturbing to our sense of living in a fundamentally just world if we do. And yet it is a choice that we can make, an act of faith, believing that the world moves closer to that beloved community when we reach beyond the safe and familiar assumptions that constitute our cultural default. The work of the holy, of justice in our communities and transformation in ourselves, begins in the imagination, in the vision of worlds that do not exist but might, in the wondering about how another person's experience could be different from our own. That is how we become agents of creativity and change, by living out stories of possibilities that we imagine together. Thousands of years ago, the exiled children of Israel imagined returning to the city on a hill, Mount Zion, from which they had been deported into a strange and menacing land. That lost city became a symbol of power, identity, memory, and continuity, and a vision for their future. Hundreds of years ago, African people, kidnapped into a foreign continent, into slavery and Christianity, found that message in the Hebrew scriptures and made Zion their own image of promised freedom and possibility for the future. Wakanda and its golden city is one more in a long line of those envisioned places that exist only in the hopes of the oppressed, to which we travel only by the power of imagination, which we build into reality by our choice to do the challenging work of dismantling privilege in the service of beloved community. To celebrate its beauty and acknowledge its claim upon us all is the first step. Will you stand and sing? extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. The Afrofuturist author Octavia Butler made this her aspiration. I am living a life I don't regret, to avenge the suffering of my ancestors, to earn the respect of future generations, and to be transformed as a person in the service of the work. I am attending to the crises of the time with my best self, and I am part of communities that are working intentionally to learn from the past and to imagine and create the future. Had she lived to this day, she might have added, Wakanda forever.